All right, all right. Good morning, Green Valley. Who's happy to be in church today? Yes. Yeah, man, so am I. I am happy to be here. It's pumped up. I love having fun in church, too. I got to do with this or that. How many Niner fans? Hey, come on, come on. How about Raider fans? Woo! Oh, that's harsh. Oh, my gosh. Oh, good times, good times. Hey, we're in this series, Built to Last, building healthy marriages, families, and friendships. And today, it's going to be a subject that you're going to want to hear, but you don't really want to hear it. You'll see in just a minute. But I'm going to start off with some questions. How many of you have had some things that were passed down by your parents that you promised, that they did or said that you promised when you were kids? I'll never say or do any of that stuff. Anybody do that? Yeah, how many of you ended up saying this? Because I said so. How many say that? Yeah. And when you were a kid, I'm not going to say that when I grow up because I need to have a reason, right? If I've told you once, I've told you there you go. So you got it. Money doesn't grow on trees. I was not born. Yesterday. Brought you into this world, I can take you out. See, you guys got this stuff, man. It's funny how stuff just carries on, huh? Oh my gosh. My dad, he's one of the things he passed down to me was wonderful sarcasm, and it was always in uncomfortable moments, and it could be done with strangers. And one particular story was we were at Disneyland one day, and the whole family was there, and we're all in there, my wife, kids, he and my mom were with us, and then a family was in there with us traveling the bus. It was like afternoon. They had a little child, the child all like, just screaming, and they couldn't do anything console her, so the couple are just fighting on each other. Well, you should have brought this, and they're just going back and forth, and my dad's sitting right next to him, and he goes, well, I thought this was the happiest place on earth. I love that sarcasm. My wife does stuff to our kids, too, that's pretty embarrassing as they grow up, but I know my kids are going to do it to their kids. So when my kids would get out of the car and they would head for, get let out at school or going to a friend's house or something like that, right when the friends gathered around our kids, my wife would yell out the window, make good choices! And I know my kids are going to pass that one along, man. All of us have been passed down certain characteristics and behaviors from our parents. Some of those things are wonderful. Some of them are good. I mean, it's like hard work or kindness or loving household, good sense with money, or had a good sense of humor, or was grace-filled, or they had this great faith. We have these good things that have been passed down from us from our parents. But some of the stuff passed down is not so good. Some of the stuff we've grown up with has actually been damaging. Some of us, lived in a household where anger was the norm. Anger was every day. Some of us grew up in a house where lying was part of the communication, or alcohol or drug abuse was an everyday affair. Maybe our parents had seeds of racism in them that we had to deal with. Or maybe they held grudges or had passive-aggressive behavior towards each other and towards you. Or maybe they had bad religion or no religion. We get the good stuff, but also there's a few bad things that come along as well. There's an old proverb in Jeremiah that is a Hebrew proverb. And it says this: the parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Which means this: it means that the actions of the parents impact the kids. And studies have shown that families tend to reproduce their own culture and dysfunctions for generations. There was one guy in 1978, he was so mad about the culture that he'd grown up with, he sued his parents. His name was Thomas Hansen of Boulder, Colorado. He sued his parents for $350,000 because of malpractice of parenting. Mom and dad had botched his upbringing so bad, he charged his suit that he would need years of costly psychiatric treatment. But let me ask you a question today, and I don't want you to raise your hand on this. Please don't raise your hand on any of this. How many of you would say that there's some characteristics that you're glad your parents passed down to you that you would want to pass on to your kids? How many would say that? How many of you would say, is there something about your parents that you don't want pass to your kids. My question to you is, what are you going to do about that? You see, you're the link in the chain from generation to generation. And the stuff that we pass depends highly on what decisions you make right now that will either have a positive effect or a negative effect on the generation behind you. You see, every decision that we make becomes part of our life story. Every decision impacts the people around us. Even our private decisions have public ramifications. And we never know who hangs in the balance of our decisions. And just because some of us had some bad DNA passed down our way, it doesn't mean that we have to allow those patterns to continue and be passed along to people we do life with. You can't change your ancestry, but you can change you. Why? Because love, as we learned last week, is always a decision. It's always a decision. And this is why I'm passionate about this subject today. I want to talk about how do we break generational chains of dysfunction and destructive habits and even sin that might have been passed down to us. How do we break that chain? Now, last week, we learned that love is the basis of all relationships. And Jesus gave us the expectations of that love and relationship. I want you to love each other as I have loved you. Not by the world's standards, but by God's standards. And what we learned last week is that Paul writes the application of this love. He writes in 1 Corinthians 13, he says, love is patient and kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. And this is the one we're going to hit today. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. It's the basis of all relationships. And the passage that we're going to use today to look at how do we break these chains of generational dysfunction and sin is found in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Paul actually gives us the outlook, the pathway to break those patterns so we don't pass them on to the next generation and the people who live around us. And this is what he says. He says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, that's a key line. We're coming back to that in the message. To offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Now listen what he says. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So here's what I want to do in these few moments that we have together. For the next few moments, I want to talk about three things that we have to understand about change itself in order to take this journey and be transformed into the person that we want to be, really, and the person that God intended us to be. The first thing you have to understand about change, it's never easy. It's never easy to change. Change is hard 99% of the time, and very few people like change. I love this quote. It says, I welcome change as long as nothing is altered or different. And that's most of us, right? And the reason why is because change is hard. And it's really hard because it starts with a question that is hard. And the question is this: if I'm going to change and transform, am I really going to be honest with myself? Am I going to recognize those things that need to be changed in my life? And this question is really important. Because you know who can deceive you more than anyone else in the world? It's you. You are your own best salesperson for yourself. Let me give you a little example, a fun example. This kid in the backyard, he's got a bat and a baseball. And mom's watching him. You know, he doesn't have any friends with him that day, so he's just got the bat and baseball. So he stands there and he goes, I'm the best hitter in the world. So he throws the ball up, takes a swing, and he misses it. So he picks up the ball and he kind of gets himself together. He goes, I am the best hitter in the world. throws that ball up, takes a swing, strike 2. Okay, got the last strike. He goes, okay, listen, I am the best hitter in the world. Throws the ball up, strike 3. He stands there for a minute and goes, I'm the best pitcher in the world. We are our own best salesperson. Now, one of the stories that has always impacted me, and I mean really impacted me, and I think about this story a lot because it applies to life in so many different ways, was the story of Peter's denial. Now, on the night that Jesus was going to be headed to the cross, and they were having the Last Supper, and Jesus got around and had all his disciples around him, and he started talking to them about his coming death, and he's going to give his life for the sins of mankind. And so the disciples sitting there listening to him, and Peter goes, even if all these fall away, I will not. Truly, Jesus said to Peter, he says, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But that doesn't stop Peter. He emphatically says, even if I have to die with you, I will never, ever disown you. And then the other disciples joined in. But what happens? Jesus is arrested. Peter tries to follow so he can watch the trial and see what's going on. So he's in the shadows, and there's some people around him. They ask him, he said, do you know this guy? You look like one of his disciples. I think I know you. And he says, nope, I don't know Jesus. I have nothing to do with him. He goes to another person, and the person says, hey, you're one of those disciples. And a little girl goes, you know, you were one of the disciples. I think you were one of Jesus' followers. He goes, nope, I never knew the man. Now, wouldn't you think, after 2 denials, Peter would go, somebody told me I was going to do that. But he does it a 3rd time. Now, there's a couple things that I want you to understand about this. Peter doesn't even know himself. He thinks he's something, but he's living a fantasy. He's not even that person. And here's what I want you to understand about the denials. This is really important. You and I have the capacity, to justify anything we do. Because you can know what's going through Peter's mind after the first denial. Well, that was just 1. Jesus said 3. And I want to stay with Jesus, so it's important for me to stay with him. So I'll just deny him here so they don't run me out. You know, denial 2. Well, denial 2, hey, I'm still not at 3. I need to stay with Jesus. I need to see what's going on. You can see how he justifies every single action and decision, but he still denies Jesus 3 times. Why? Because he doesn't know himself. And this story should remind us all about how far we can go when we're not honest with ourselves. Real change doesn't happen until you say, I'm that person. Now, Peter did get it right after he denied Jesus 3 times. He went out, he was sorrowful for it. And then after Jesus rose from the dead, he went on to be the head of the church and start the church. And we're experiencing his leadership right now. And he never denied Christ again, even to where it was his own crucifixion where he was held, put upside down on a cross. But at that moment, he didn't know himself. And this is what I think causes a lot of the cycles of dysfunction in our families and lives, is that we just carry things through to the next generation because it's what we've saw, it's what we've seen, and so we just do it. And it's hard to look at ourselves and be honest. It is. It's hard to say, this is the ugly stuff of my life. It's hard for a dad who's way over the top with his kids and their involvement in sports, who can't understand why the parents don't like him and his kids hate the sports, to admit that he's over the top with sports with his kids. It's hard for a person who doesn't want to admit that they have a secret addiction. They've got it under control. They're able to manage it during the day, but they have a secret addiction and everything else is falling apart around them. But it's not because of their addiction, no. It's hard to admit that. It's the marriage that the romance is gone because one spouse is just selfish and the other spouse wants peace at all costs. So you have this highly dysfunctional marriage that is really misery. Now, I told you I'd come back to this phrase, in view of God's mercy. And I love Paul's perspective as he kicks off this transformation passage. He says, in view of God's mercy. In other words, when God looks at our dysfunctions and sin, he doesn't look at it with the eyes of condemnation. He looks at it with the eyes of mercy. And the eyes of mercy say this is my child, this is my boy, this is my girl, and I don't want you to live like this. So if you'll just let me, if you'll just be honest with yourself, we can walk the road of transformation and we can change the things that are wrong in you so that you can thrive in your relationships, in your parenting, in your husband, with your husband, your wife, and your kids. It's the eyes of mercy that God looks at us, not condemnation. So being honest to ourselves has to be the start of it. So the question is, are you willing to acknowledge that you might be that person? Now, God already knows who you are. God called it out in Peter. He knew Peter was going to be afraid. He knew he was going to turn coward. He knew he was going to make the wrong decisions. But what does God do when he raises from the dead? Jesus do when he raises from the dead? He says, when they spot him, he says, go tell the disciples and Peter that I've risen from the dead. Why? Because Jesus looked at Peter with mercy. Because he doesn't want to condemn Peter. He wants to transform Peter. And that's exactly what happened. So here's my challenge to you on this one. Can you be honest with yourself? Can you say, I'm that person when it comes to, hey, I got a bad attitude, or I'm always negative, or I'm a gossiper, or I kind of fudge the truth from time to time? Or can you get to that place where you say, I'm that person? Because that's the start of your transformation. Second thing we see about change is this: it's never more gratifying to change. God always has our best intentions in mind. Okay, let's go back to the passage again. It says, in view of God's mercy to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Now, let's break this down for just a moment. To offer your bodies, okay? This means there's a willingness to say, here, God, here's my mental, my physical, my emotional being, and I'm submitting my whole self to you for the process of change. And then it says, as a living sacrifice, not a dead sacrifice. A dead sacrifice would be a one-time event. A living sacrifice means it goes on and on and on. I'm doing this in real life. I'm playing this out in real life, so it goes through a lifetime. And then it says sacrifice. In other words, there's something that you're going to have to give up that you really have hung on to or has been ingrained to you that's going to be hard for you to give up, because if it wasn't hard to give up, it wouldn't be a sacrifice. And so this is what God is saying. He says, okay, if you're honest with yourself, now present yourself to me and submit yourself to me, and I'll take you through the process of being changed. Now, some of you are saying, well, Scott, that doesn't sound gratifying. This sounds really tough. It is. Because most of us embrace the proposal of change, but not the process of change. I mean, we want phone booth transformation. Clark Kent in the telephone booth goes in, boom, comes out Superman. That's what we want. But it doesn't work that way. God doesn't do that because there's something we learn in the process of change that we can't learn if we jumped right to the finished product. Let me give you an example. Probably about 4 years ago, I went to Switzerland for my first time. And most of you know my son-in-law is a Swiss, and my daughter married him, and they abandoned us in the United States. Had a grandbaby and all that. And by the way, on a side note, this Wednesday, we pick him up. He got his green card to come to the United States for all time, man. Come to the United States. Yeah. Anyway, so we go to Switzerland, and they've been telling us all about these hikes. And, Switzerland is absolutely beautiful. It's got all these mountains and stuff like that. And so all these hikes that were going on, so I wanted to go on a hike. And I said, yeah, put me on a hike. And I thought, and my daughter goes, hey, it's a little bit tough, Dad. I mean, they're long hikes. These guys don't go on easy hikes. And so I said, well, no, I can do it. And she says, give me one. I'll take it. No problem. No issues at all. So we start out of the day, and there's my son-in-law, me, my daughter, Kelly. There's my son-in-law's sister and his mom and dad. And his mom and dad are like, they're well put together. And they are hikers, okay? And so there's, some backpacks that need to be carried. So, I pick up one of the backpacks and go, yeah, I'll carry that pack for you guys. No problem, because I'm Scott, and I'm 45 minutes into this hike. We haven't even hit any hard parts yet. I couldn't carry the pack. And there's only women now who could carry it besides me. But I was so exhausted that I asked my daughter to carry the pack for me. So we're hiking, right? And we get to this place where the picture is right here. We get to this place right here where not this one. Go back, please, go back. Please go back. We get to this right here. Now I want to just show this. The lake is right there, and that's halfway. And at this point, I'm done hiking. I'm finished. It's over. My legs are jelly, and it was unbelievably like, okay, let's go home. And so we took a picture with the cow, and I thought it was over. I really did. I thought it was over, and so I asked Teo, who's my son-in-law's dad, are we done? And he points up. Now, you can't see it, but it's about as high as one of those mountains behind you. He says, no, that's where we're going. And I'm like, oh, Lord Jesus. I wanted the rapture to happen now. So we hiked up, and guys, it was everything I could do. I thought I was going to pass away a couple of times, and here is us coming to the top right here, finish right here, the finish line. There's my wife right there.
Yes, Kelly.
We got the walking sticks. There I am, dead.
Done.
I thought I'd won the world. But I want to show you a picture. Show this next picture right here. This is a picture of us on top of that mountain. The lake was halfway up. So if you can imagine, it took us 4.5 hours to do this trip. Now, the reason why I tell you this story is because I learned a lot about myself during this trip. One is, I'm not as in good shape as I thought I was. The Swiss are much better. I learned that my daughter is amazing because she carried the pack for 2.5 hours. But I also learned that the guides, Teo and his wife, they were amazing people because they stood by us every step of the way to make sure we got to the top. I remember the last part was, everybody says, the last part's like this. The last part was like this. And we're walking up, and I couldn't, my legs were so heavy. Teo was right there with me. He says, just put one foot in front of the other. So come on, one foot in front of the other. He's got a pack. He's got like 3 packs. It's, don't slow down, because if you slow down, it gets harder. Well, I can't even move, dude. That kind of thing. But he was right there with me the whole day. And here's the thing. We got through the trip, and what we got to do is we got to see that amazing view. Okay, here's what I want you to learn with that. When it comes to change, some of us settle for the cow instead of the top of the mountain. See, the question is, are you willing to go through the process? Because what you learn in the process actually makes what you're learning stick. You don't build character unless your character faces adversity. You never fight fair in your marriage if you don't learn and practice the tools of fighting fair. You don't learn to give grace in failure unless you have failed and someone gives you grace. You don't learn to control your anger unless you go through a process of digging deep and finding out what fuels your anger. Personal experience. You don't build strong faith unless it's tested in the storms of life. If you don't go through the process, you won't learn what God is doing. You'll never get to the mountain if you settle for the cow, and you'll never get the view because the view was spectacular when we got to the top. And when I got to the view, it made me go, I'll do this again. Now watch what Paul says here. He says, look, this is how you do it. This is how you go through the process of change. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. There's a pattern of this world that is dysfunctional. There is a pattern of this world, sorry to say it, that is rooted in sin. Do not conform to that pattern, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't let this world squeeze you into some kind of pattern that's going to take you away and do damage to your relationships. And patterns are set by what we have seen and experienced around us. This is why it's so important for us to set new patterns. To transform a defect in your life, new patterns have to be set, and that's what becomes difficult. For some of you, the new pattern needs to be set of getting involved in Big Wednesdays and learning how Christ does life. The pattern of coming on Wednesday night, the pattern of sitting around a table with other men and women in small groups to help to learn how you get to know Christ, how he does life. You need to set that pattern in order to grow you spiritually and work on some of these defects and dysfunctions. For some of us, it's a new pattern of showing up to celebrate recovery. They will tell you if you show up one night, they'll say, give us 6 weeks. 6 weeks, because what you have to do in order to overcome your hurt, habit, or hang up is you have to set a pattern of working on it to get to the other side, to get to the mountain and see the view. For some of you, it's setting new patterns of maybe seeing a counselor, because this is something you got to dig into. That was mine. For some of you, it's getting into a marriage class and setting a pattern to work through the issues so your marriage will thrive, not just survive. And this is a side note. This happened the first service too, but this is something God gave me in the first service, and I just want to talk to parents who have young kids. Okay, right now, parents who have young kids. Please listen to me. We have a lot of fun stuff to do in this world, a lot of good, fun stuff to do in this world. But the problem is, a lot of times we will set a pattern of doing those good, fun things and unintentionally reduce the priority of God to second place. And what happens in your kid's life is they will see that pattern and they will take that pattern further to the next generation. I have seen people who love God with all their hearts. They are great people. They treat their kids fairly. They're wonderful people. And yet, because of a sport or some kind of event, God was a second priority. And when their kids became adults, they never went to church. You have to set patterns so that you can transform yourself. And what that does is not only affects you, but it affects the people around you. Those patterns will be seen, and they will be copied, they will be appreciated, and it will have an impact on them. But look what it says about that when you set those patterns. Look what it says. It says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good. His will for us is good, his pleasing and perfect will. I mean, that's what I want to be in. I want to be in that lane where I got God's good will for my life. I want to be in that lane. But it takes some effort on my part to set the pattern so that will happen. So let me give you one more thought. It's never too late to change. I don't care how old you are, it's never too late to change. One of the most powerful changes that I saw in my life by an older person was my father. Some of you know the story. Pastor, a church, but my dad had a dysfunction. He didn't know how to deal with worry and sin, and actually worry and stress. And actually, worry and stress, if we don't give it to God, actually the Bible calls it a sin. So he didn't know how to do that. So what did he do? He buried it. And about 40, somewhere in his 40s, I can't remember the exact age, he had a full-blown nervous breakdown. Full-blown. Had to quit the ministry, went to work a secular job at Chevron Refinery. No problem with that. That's fine. But he had to leave something that he loved in order to get his health back. But here's what I saw in my dad. My dad took the steps to get healthy. He said, okay, I'm going to go to a counselor. I'm going to see a counselor. I'm going to get people around me who are going to encourage me. My dad, after about, I don't know, if it was 6 to 8 years, can't remember, went back into the ministry. And the rest of his 20 years of ministry were fabulous. He never had a problem again because he fixed it. And you know what that did for me? As I got older, I said, no, I'm not going to have the nervous breakdown. When I see the problem coming, I'm going to a counselor. I'm going to get people around me right away before that happens. So his pattern of getting healthy helped me avoid the same thing that happened to him. This is the power of relationships when we set patterns that are to fix ourselves in a place where it's God honoring, because it impacts the world around us. Now here's the thing. We're not here to change people. I don't change people. You know what really changed people? God's love changed people. And so we structure our churches, our services, and everything that people experience God's love first, because God's love is actually what draws people to be a person that says, I want to change. I want to be like that. You know, one of the ministries we do that is Common Ground. Common Ground is people come and they need food. They need clothing. They're in some bad places in life. But you know what we do? We just accept them as they are because God loves. Accept us as we are. Come on in. But when that starts to happen, something starts to take place where people go, hey, wait a minute. Man, there's got to be a better way. And then conversations start to take place where lives start to change. One particular story is this about a gal named Cynthia. Cynthia, when she was growing up, her mom called her accident because she was always, fumbling and jumbling around. Mom thought it was funny, but she took it and ran with it. To the place where Cynthia, who saw herself as an accident, got involved with drugs and other relationships and found herself in prison. One of our people from the prison ministry visited there, and when they met Cynthia, she introduced herself as Accident. She had taken on that name. And this guy from the prison ministry from our church says, no, you're not an accident. There are no accidents. God loves you, man. He created you. There's no accident. And they started to build a relationship, and after that, every time that he would see her, he would call her, hey, child of God, until she started taking the name Cynthia back. She became a Christ follower in prison. When she got out of prison, she started cleaning houses. And then she started a business of cleaning houses where she hired people, women who were getting out of prison so they could have a chance to have some employment and make some money. She started serving down here at our Common Ground. And one of the conversations I got in with one of our people, she says, you know what changed me? What changed me was God's love. That's what I experienced first, and that started the change. I pray to you that today maybe you experience that same thing. Because God loves you as you are right now, but he loves you so much, he's got a better plan for you.